here are the details based on conversation I had with a White House official involved. The negotiating has been going on for 8 months. Hamas, I'm told by this official, has agreed to give up weapons to cite the location of all the tunnels that are throughout Gaza and have agreed to a decommissioning. How is it possible? I asked. The answer was that Arab states united against Hamas, Arab allies of the United States, all put pressure on Hamas to accept this deal and let them know that they were completely isolated. In exchange, they have been given amnesty, full and complete amnesty, if they accept the terms of this deal, which they say they have. I asked what government would be running Gaza in the coming months. It said it would be a government in receivership for Gaza. A group called the National Committee of Palestinians, a group of engineers, technocrats, etc., would be running this government in the short term. I was told Tony Blair, it's interesting, we were just talking about the peace deal in Ireland with Richard Haass earlier, who was special emissary to that deal. And I asked him, how in the world did that happen with the IRA? And he gave us his answer. But Tony Blair, obviously very involved in the peace deal with the IRA and Great Britain. Tony Blair also very involved here. He's been working quietly behind the scenes with this National Committee of Palestinians, helping them stand up a government, again, in receivership for now in the short term. I asked about security inside and on the borders of Gaza. I was told there are going to be 5,000 soldiers that are going to be from a total of 13, 14 countries, including Egypt, Morocco, and Indonesia. So that would be 5,000 soldiers and 20,000 police officers inside of Gaza. This official told me at the end, we only have one goal for this peace deal, and that is stopping the next war. Let's bring into the conversation staff writer at The Atlantic, Frank Foer, MS Now senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard, also Jonathan Lemire and Pablo Torre still with us. Let's start, Jonathan Lemire, with you. This is obviously something and I left out one important detail, which you can speak to right now. This official I spoke with said, we actually think, with the help of our Arab allies, we have Hamas on board in exchange for amnesty. Obviously, the next big challenge is to go ahead and have Israel announce publicly that they also are on board. They were part of these negotiations, but obviously Benjamin Netanyahu has an election coming up. I don't know that this would be something extraordinarily popular in Israel right now, right before that election. So this White House official, very clear-eyed about that being the next and final step to actually make this, which he said 8 months ago was unthinkable, but to make this a reality.
Yeah, I mean, this would be an extraordinary development, of course, but it's the Middle East. Everything is inherently fragile. Nothing's done until it's done. But you're right. I mean, if Hamas is indeed signing off on to truly give up their weapons, show off where the tunnels that they've built over decades in the enclave there, that would be significant. And we know this is, as much as Gaza has sort of faded from the headlines as the Iran war has taken center stage, there has been work going on behind the scenes for months now, and Gulf states, regional partners there of the United States, have played a role as well. I mean, there's a lot of details here. Of course, they're going to have to be worked out, like who exactly is this police force? How are they going to be armed? You know, Richard, to his point about the IRA earlier, he said, well, part of the reason why that ended up working is the IRA, through Sinn Féin, got a political say. They're part of the political process. Is that going to work here? We have to see on that. And, of course, Vaughn, Israel, as Joe just said, is the biggest potentially question mark still there. I mean, it is not that many years since October 7th. And, of course, we have seen the way the world has responded to the way that Israel then attacked Gaza in the months and years that followed. Is Prime Minister Netanyahu going to sign off on this That just simply remains to be seen. And if that doesn't happen, of course, this would go away. But it seems like at least a key step that Hamas is showing, as much as they can be believed, showing a willingness to change.
Right. This would be a remarkable development if Hamas were to move forward with a disarmament, especially when you look in the context of 2020 and the so-called peace plan at the time that was put forward by the White House, Trump White House, and Jared Kushner. And at that point in time, this quasi two-state solution that was being proposed in 2020 would have required Hamas to disarm, which was a non-starter at the time for Hamas. And even Mahmoud Abbas made it very clear that this wasn't a real proposal. And yet it was, as part of that plan, required Israeli security forces to be the ones to oversee the Gaza Strip. And so I think that is really where the question is for Bibi Netanyahu here, who has made, not just in Gaza, but also in Lebanon, made it very clear to the Trump White House that he wants IDF forces to remain and engage and to ensure that this is the end of Iran, its proxy groups that have put for generations now threats against the Israeli Jewish people here. And so I think the question is, especially when you compare it to that 2020 quasi two-state solution that was put forward by the Trump administration, some of those terms you could say were better for the Israelis, especially understanding their security forces would be the ones. And it's a matter of whether Bibi Netanyahu will succumb to pressures by President Trump to engage in this deal, understanding that Hamas taking this sort of a step is really a remarkable one.
It would be a remarkable step.
Yeah.
And Frank Foer, you just wrote an article for The Atlantic talking about how Benjamin Netanyahu lost America. And so we've talked about the bad timing of this deal for Israel because Netanyahu has an election coming up. But I can't imagine things getting much worse for Benjamin Netanyahu than angering Donald Trump right now in blowing up this peace deal, which would be, again, we always have to do the caveat. Dr. Brzezinski would do the caveat, even being part of one of the most significant Middle East peace deals ever. It's the Middle East. So there always are asterisks and caveats and warnings. But in this case, I can't imagine Netanyahu's in a terrible position. This is going to be unpopular domestically in Israel. But it's also would really hurt his standing with voters if Donald Trump erupted and went after him for actually blowing up what would be really the most historic peace deal of Donald Trump's two terms.
Yeah, so Netanyahu's challengers in this election are to his left, but they've been attacking him from his right. And if he were to withdraw fully from Gaza with a plan that definitely has some pretty significant logistical weaknesses in it, I'm sure that he'll get bludgeoned on this. But the Trump administration also understands that it really does have him over a barrel right now because Netanyahu has objectives that he would like to see achieved in Iran. And I think the Trump administration last night was making it very clear that there was maybe some linkage between what they intend to do in the Iran war and Netanyahu's acceptance of this plan. And then the other thing is that I think that this just reveals the utter collapse of Netanyahu's strategy as far as it's concerned with the way in which he's played the United States and his domestic politics, which is that he bet everything on Donald Trump and this fact that he would be able to control Donald Trump or that Donald Trump this alignment would pay off for him in exactly the ways that he wanted. And in the course of doing so, completely alienated everybody else on the political spectrum here in America. And having made that bet, it's put him in this very, very narrow, very, very precarious political spot back home.
You know, I'm looking at Frank's piece, Joe, and it is remarkable in the domestic context. You know, the Democratic Party 2 years ago, 19 senators voted to block arms sales to Israel. This April, 40 out of 47 did. Speaking to what that looks like along the spectrum that Frank was just describing. And so, you know, this conversation with this White House official that you talked to, how is this viewed, do you think, like within the domestic politics of the United States? What is the strategy there, given that backdrop, too?
Well, obviously, a peace deal between Israel and Hamas would be seen as extraordinarily historic and would be seen, I would think, domestically as positive. What really is, I think, puts more weight on this whole deal is the buy-in that these negotiators and the Trump administration got from other Arab countries who, and we've said this before on the show, they will publicly talk about the Palestinian cause, but privately, almost every Arab leader, almost every Arab diplomat, almost every Arab official I've talked to over the past 20 years, and especially over the past 5 years, see them as nothing but a problem for them politically. And so I'm not shocked at all the Arab states that are going to be policing and working the borders. I'm not surprised that they've decided to get involved with this, but it does provide some real heft. But they were, from the very beginning, you'll remember, we were reporting here going back 2 years that when we talked about a peacekeeping force, we always, John Lemire, heard the same thing. Okay? And I know you, in your reporting, you heard the same thing that I heard from Arab leaders. Okay, we'll go in. We will go in and we'll be a multinational Arab force to bring peace to the region, but not until Hamas disarms. So this isn't, I mean, to me, based on all my reporting over the years, these terms, even though they would be extraordinary if it ever came to reality, and that's a big if, I'm not shocked by the outcome of this because a lot of Arab states have said all along, sure, we will go into Gaza and we will provide security, but you've got to get the weapons out of the hands of Hamas first.